Welcome to our channel. If you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any of our spooky stories. St. Peter's School in Chicago is not just an old building, it is a monument to history, a structure with over 80 years of history, and a testament to a bygone era. With its red brick walls and tall windows, which seem to watch over the city with an austere gaze, the school stands with a charm that conceals a dark past. During the height of World War II, the world was in chaos, and Chicago was not spared from the terror of bombings. However, St. Peter's School was one of the unluckiest targets. On a fateful night, while the sky was filled with explosions and smoke, a bomb fell directly on the school. Flames engulfed the hallways and classrooms as desperate cries echoed through the now destroyed corridors. Several students and teachers died that night, their dreams and hopes tragically cut short. After the bombing, the school was rebuilt, but the reconstruction did not erase the tragedy that had occurred. In place of the ruins, a new school rose, but a sense of sorrow and sadness lingered over the site. Many said that something was out of place, that the walls still bore the weight of lost souls. Those who passed through noticed something strange, a whisper in the wind, a shadow that seemed to move with a life of its own. It was as if the story of pain and loss had left an indelible mark. St. Peter's School continued its existence as if nothing had happened, but the echoes of the past seemed to be ever present, watching and waiting. And now, something was starting to happen. Something that would awaken the horrors of the past and turn the daily lives of students and teachers into a nightmare. In the first days of school, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The routine followed its usual course, with students moving through the corridors and teachers preparing their lessons with dedication. But as the weeks went by, something began to disturb the attendees of St. Peter's School. It was a trivial event at first, a light flickering erratically in a dimly lit corridor. Nothing more than a malfunctioning bulb, they thought. However, soon these small events became more frequent and unsettling. The sense of discomfort was palpable. Students felt an inexplicable chill, as if they were being watched by invisible eyes. Then the whispers began. Sometimes, in the middle of class, when silence became absolute, there seemed to be murmurs coming from nowhere in particular. Students and teachers looked around, trying to locate the source of the sounds, but found nothing. There was a constant feeling that something was out of place, a sense that the walls were closing in on them. Doors started closing on their own. It was as if an invisible force was pushing them, causing them to slam shut with a sudden bang, leaving everyone on edge. And it wasn't just the movement of the doors. Cabinets were opened and closed for no apparent reason, and books scattered across the floor with an unsettling regularity. Students began to gather in small groups, sharing stories of disturbing experiences. Some swore they had seen shadows moving through the corridors, while others spoke of an oppressive presence that seemed to follow their steps. Teachers, initially skeptical, began to notice that their personal belongings were mysteriously disappearing, only to reappear in strange places. As the events intensified, the atmosphere in the school became increasingly heavy. The feeling of being watched was unrelenting, and conversations in the corridors were filled with nervousness and fear. Something was beginning to manifest, and the school, which once seemed a refuge for learning, was turning into a place where fear was a constant presence. The climate of unease at St. Peter's School reached an unbearable point. Students and teachers were increasingly distressed, and the stories about what was happening became more fantastic and disturbing. Doubt and fear hung in the air like a black cloud that seemed to never dissipate. It was on a rainy day, when the school was particularly empty, that a group of students decided to go beyond speculation and seek answers. Driven by a mix of curiosity and desperation, they began to investigate the school's past, delving into old files and forgotten documents. Among the dusty papers and faded books, they found a forgotten record detailing the tragedy from decades ago. The pages, yellowed and fragile, spoke of the devastating bombing that had turned the school into a scene of chaos and suffering. The account detailed how the bomb had hit the school during the night while students and teachers were in the building, trying to protect themselves from the air raids. Each new detail was a punch to the gut: shattered families, bodies found among the rubble, and the desperate attempt to save those still alive. But what most captured the students' attention was a specific detail: the mention of a mourning ceremony where a kind of ritual had been performed to honor the dead and calm their spirits. However, the ceremony was interrupted by the collapse of the school and was never completed. The group decided to investigate further and found a box buried in a hidden corner of the school. Inside were personal items of the victims, photos, letters, and even some symbolic relics. There was also an old diary from one of the teachers describing strange paranormal experiences and a growing sense of guilt, as if they hadn't done enough to help those who died. The terror deepened as they began reading the accounts in the diary. The pages spoke of inexplicable sounds, shadowy figures, and a constant feeling that something was about to happen. The students realized with a shiver that what they were experiencing was not just a series of isolated events. It was a cycle that had begun long before them, a cycle of pain and revenge that seemed to repeat itself. The group of students, now terrified, found themselves at an impasse. They knew they had unearthed something beyond their understanding and control, something that was awakening once again, and the true horror was only beginning to reveal itself. As the days went by, the events at St. Peter's School began to escalate in intensity. What had once been minor inconveniences and disturbances now turned into more aggressive and disturbing paranormal manifestations. The school, once a place of learning, had become a stage for a terrifying and inescapable spectacle. It was a morning that the students would never forget. The school bell rang normally, but when they entered the classrooms, they found overturned furniture, scattered books, and a sense of chaos that seemed to align with the disturbance in the environment. In a particularly terrifying moment, a nebulous figure appeared in front of the history class, causing everyone to scream and run in panic. The shadow vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving a trail of fear and confusion. Whispers turned into screams. Students and teachers began to hear anguished voices coming from empty places. It was as if the walls were alive, crying out and pleading for justice. The messages were confusing, mixing pleas for help with threats of revenge, creating an atmosphere of constant terror. The classrooms were being invaded by an invisible presence. Chairs moved on their own, and sometimes an entire group was caught by a chill wind that seemed to come from nowhere. A feeling of suffocation and despair seemed to permeate the air, leaving everyone who entered the building with an unbearable sense of oppression. The school corridors were especially eerie at night. Someone began to notice that the lights would turn off by themselves and flicker back on frantically, as if trying to reveal something hidden in the shadows. Those who had the courage to walk through the dark corridors saw doors opening and closing forcefully, accompanied by frantic whispers that seemed to follow their steps. Things reached a climax when a group of students, defying their fear, decided to explore the school's basement, a place that had long been locked and forgotten. At the bottom of the basement, they found an oddly preserved environment, a sort of room that seemed to have been left in a state of abrupt abandonment. In the center, there was a table covered with burned candles and strange symbols drawn on the floor, which seemed to belong to some sort of ancient ritual. Horror peaked when they began to feel an intense, almost palpable presence. The air was charged with a cold and oppressive energy, and every movement seemed to provoke a furious response from the entities inhabiting the space. The manifestations reached a point where it was impossible to distinguish between reality and illusion. The line between the world of the living and the dead was dangerously blurred. Despair began to take over São Pedro School, and the school community was on the brink of collapse. Each day, the paranormal manifestations became more aggressive, and attempts to find a solution seemed increasingly futile. It was clear that the vengeful spirit of those who had died in the bombing was becoming more active, and the pressure to solve the mystery intensified. It was then that a group of students, determined to face whatever was tormenting the school, sought the help of a paranormal expert. The man was known for his experience with supernatural events, but his presence at the school seemed only to intensify the terror. His first impressions were grim. He spoke of a malignant energy deeply rooted in the building and warned that what the students were facing was more than a simple phenomenon. It was a collective spirit, fueled by suffering and injustice. The expert proposed performing a ritual to appease the spirits and offer them some form of release. However, the attempt to perform the ritual was marked by a series of catastrophic failures. As the students and the expert prepared the space and the necessary items, the environment transformed into an absolute nightmare. The candles that were supposed to create a safe space would extinguish and reignite on their own, and a freezing wind seemed to blow from all sides, interrupting the ceremony with every step. The students tried to follow the expert's instructions, reciting incantations and performing the movements with the required precision. But with each attempt, the screams and wails of the spirits grew louder and more anguished. The apparitions became increasingly visible and aggressive, with shadows moving frenetically and ethereal figures seeming to struggle to free themselves from eternal torment. Despair culminated in an event that defied all logic. One of the students, trying to escape the mounting pressure, made an unexpected move that resulted in the breaking of one of the ritual objects. Immediately, an invisible and overwhelming force seemed to attack the group, throwing them against the walls and creating a sense of absolute terror. The expert, with a pale face and a terrified gaze, realized that the ritual had unleashed something even deeper and darker. The situation became unsustainable. The students, now terrified and exhausted, realized that they were not only dealing with the spirit of a single person, but with a collective presence of furious and tortured souls. The atmosphere was saturated with palpable terror, and every attempt to calm the situation only seemed to fuel the spirit's fury. With the ritual's failure and the intensity of the paranormal manifestations, the school became almost uninhabitable. The walls seemed to pulse with a hostile energy, and fear became a constant in every corner. The students and teachers faced the harsh reality that there was no simple solution. The only way out was to abandon the place before the situation became even more devastating. Panic took over São Pedro School. With every attempt to confront the spirits failing and the situation becoming increasingly desperate, the final decision was inevitable. The school administration, after tense meetings and fear-laden discussions, decided to close the building's doors. What was once a symbol of education and hope had now become a relic of terror. The last night before the closure was a whirlwind of frenetic activity. Students and teachers gathered to pack the last items, with a growing sense of urgency and despair. Shadows danced on the walls, and whispers seemed to grow louder, as if the spirits were aware of the decision about to be made. Every noise, every movement seemed amplified by a sense that something was about to happen, something terrifying and final. When the last box was sealed and the last light was turned off, a heavy silence fell over the school. The group remaining for the final inspection felt an overwhelming presence, a sense that they were being watched by something on the verge of manifesting. With trembling hands and a growing sense of urgency, they locked the doors one last time and left the building. The night was deep, and the now deserted school seemed to be breathing with its own rhythm. The wind whistled through the broken windows, and the shadows cast by the streetlights created a sinister dance around the school. When the last cleaning crew left, the school appeared to be in a state of waiting, as if holding its breath, anticipating something to come. The school's closure was marked by a series of mysterious incidents. Local news began circulating about the strange events occurring in the area. Screams coming from the deserted school, lights flickering in windows that should have been dark, and even reports of shadowy figures seen by passers-by. The school became a place of urban legends, a place that inspired both fear and fascination. However, the impact of the closed school was felt beyond the walls of the building. The local community was marked by a sense of loss and unease. The former symbol of hope was now an emblem of a collective nightmare. Local families spoke of the terror they had experienced and the fear they felt when passing by the now abandoned school. St. Peter's School, now sealed and shrouded in mystery, stood as a somber monument to the events that occurred there. The spirits that had haunted the place were now trapped in a space between reality and the beyond, their quest for revenge and justice interrupted only by the decision to abandon the site. The terror that once permeated its halls had transformed into a legend, a cautionary tale about what can happen when the wounds of the past remain open and are not properly appeased.